And welcome back to the Harvest Show. Joining us today is Pastor Casey Tygrett. He joins us to talk about spiritual curiosity, what it is and what it means to have it functioning in our lives. So let's just jump right out the gate with that question. You say that becoming curious, we can go deeper in God and have a better relationship with one another. Kind of explain that for us.
Yeah, I began looking at kids, and you know, kids are born, they don't have to learn how to be curious. It's something that's native software for them. They come right out with it. And that's how they understand the world that they live in. And I began to look at Jesus, and the one thing I noticed about him is he invites us into this big, beautiful new world, but it's a way of life that we have really no idea about how it's supposed to go. We love it, we're drawn to it, but how does that work? And so there's this moment of recovering that curiosity and saying, if this is a new world that you're inviting me to, I need to ask some questions. I need to figure it out so that I can actually get my hands around it and understand it so I can begin to live there.
But come on, we're taught as kids early on, it's that because I say it's that. Don't ask any questions. Why, Mom? Because I said so. But you're saying we should do the opposite.
Yeah. Well, certainty is always much easier. As a parent of a young child, my daughter's 10. And so I get it. There are moments where you're like, it is what it is, let's move on. But when it comes to God, there's this sensitivity that His Spirit puts in us to say, I'm going to walk with you through this. And there are some questions you're going to have, and you need to ask them because it's good for you. And so it actually has changed a little bit of the way that I've parented since I started thinking about this idea to kind of honor those questions, because this is what she's doing to try and figure out what the world is supposed to be like. And we have been taught to just nail it down because it is a little easier in certain stages. Like curiosity when you're driving, probably not a great idea. You want to be certain about left and right, stop and go, things like that. But there are other things that actually broaden that for us.
When did you find yourself becoming curious about Christ and your relationship with Him?
A lot of it started out of work as a pastor and having people come and ask questions, and I would help them to find an answer. And what I noticed was it didn't seem to satisfy. It seemed to pacify them. They were like, well, okay, that's all right. But when I found out about asking better questions, I started doing the work of spiritual direction with people and giving them the question beneath what they're asking for. What I noticed was there was this light in people's eyes, like something clicked for them and said, I didn't walk away with an answer. What I walked away with is another place for me to go and seek God.
So are there specific questions we should ask when we come to faith in Christ?
Yeah. I think so. I think I'm always looking for the question underneath the question. What I know of, and I looked at Jesus throughout this because He's our guide for that. Our invitation to this new world that God is building, this kingdom, is always Jesus. And what I notice about Jesus is He takes people's question and then He goes one deeper. Who is my neighbor? Well, who's been a neighbor to the person who is wounded, who is in need? And so there's always a question underneath the question. So the best ones for us is to say, what is the next step below that? What's the next step down? Jesus is telling us what. The question now becomes how. It says, love your enemies. That's wonderful. How? Well, depends on who your enemy is. And depends on what kind of relationship you have with them.
In fact, Jesus uses a lot of questions Himself and asks a lot of questions in the gospel, doesn't He?
Yeah. Interacts with somewhere around 183 questions. Either asks them, responds to them, or answers. This is the thing that people do to us, and it annoys us to no end, but Jesus answered questions with questions a lot of times. Yeah. And so He's just chipping down below the surface of people's faith and saying, there's something underneath here that if you just work at it and engage it, it could be the most catalyzing, growth-inducing thing that you could get your hands around.
And sometimes that questioning can begin with something, on the surface, like a person is going through a hardship. It could simply start with that why. Yeah. And why me, God? Why am I suffering? Why am I going through the things that I'm doing? But if we keep pushing into God, we'll go even deeper, won't we?
Yeah. And there are some things we have to accept when that happens. There's a gift that is the tension that comes with asking good questions. And it doesn't sound, I don't know many people who would say tension is a gift, but it also puts us in a spot where we really trust in God. I hear that in David, Psalm 13 especially, where he's saying, how long? And there's not an answer, but there's a confirmation for him. I want to be sure of this. I don't know how long, but I'm going to sit with you in the tension of this moment saying, this has got to end. This is not what I expected from you, God. And yet this is where we are.
But isn't that one of the reasons why we don't ask more questions? Because lots of times we don't feel we're getting the answers. And that seems to be the common thread that you hear from a lot of people in their prayer life. I pray and I pray and I pray, and I don't hear the voice of God. I don't get answers.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's coming to rest with that. What I love about Jesus is this invitation to come and rest with him. And so sometimes asking a question, we then put it on the table, and then we just have to rest with God in it a little bit. And suffering is a difficult place for us to rest. In my own life, the things I've gone through that have been difficult, and we've been asking that question, why hasn't this happened? Why hasn't this event come about the way that I wanted it to come about? And sometimes there's just a, hey, stay with me for a minute here. Just another beat, and things will come through, but you have to wait here with me.
And you say that we can prime the pump.
Yes.
Yes, through journaling. Talk about that.
Yeah, when I started working on this idea, one of the things I knew is I didn't do it well enough or often enough, so I tried to keep a journal 15 minutes a day for 30 days and write every single question that was on my mind. Just stream of consciousness, didn't edit, just let it flow out of the pen. And what happens then is you start to see things. The first couple days are pretty cheesy, like, why is the weather so bad? You know, all these things. And then as you got through to the deeper ones, and as life events began to happen over that 30 days, I began to see these really powerful questions that some of them I still don't have answers to. But that gets us in this mode of asking and seeking and going one below the question that's on the top of our minds.
But we can come to a place where we have the peace of God, even though we don't have those answers. Isn't that correct?
I think the peace is in the asking sometimes.
Oh, good.
You know, with Jesus' way of training his disciples, he oftentimes just left things wide open and said, stay with me. I'm going to answer with a question, but I'm going to let it rest. I think that's the heart of that. If you've got ears here, you have peace in this because you're with me, that presence. And as you're with me, these are some of the things that are going to continue you're going to continue to have tension with it, you're going to continue to struggle with it, but we're going to do that together.
All the things you're talking about, the journaling, the continued asking of questions, these are disciplines.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have problems with disciplines. I know when it comes to my workout regimen, my diet, those are disciplines I have difficulties with. So what you're presenting here, you do understand, might not be appealing to some people who say, that's all I need is another discipline for me to fail in my life.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm always, when I'm teaching about disciplines, I always put vision first. This has to be strong enough, the outcome of you being a curious follower of Jesus, that has to be strong enough to get you up in the morning to open the journal, put pen to paper. If it's not, it probably won't last. So I think there's a toe in the water kind of moment where you try this, you start engaging with it, and you start to see things change, and then that vision is what drives us forward. Same thing with working out or eating better. When you start to buy smaller pants, the vision is really strong.
Yeah.
And so if our questions stop haunting us and then begin to become things that we can sit with and we can have peace with, that's a strong vision.
Talk about the power of forgiveness and the part that it plays in becoming that curious Christian.
Yeah. Forgiveness is one of those that I feel like certainty sometimes messes with because we see it as an exchange. It's about filing the right paperwork. So if I just say the right things and sign my name at the bottom and hand it to the person who's wounded me, then that's over. But I think for curiosity to help us with forgiveness, part of that's realizing, what if forgiveness is not something we do, but it's a place where we live? It's a continual every morning waking up and saying, today I'm going to let go of this bitterness, of this hurt, and it may not be a perfect letting go, but I'm going to let it go as much as I can today. And we continue to be in that spot until it becomes a place where we live, not an action that we do.
So I hear you saying that it's a choice.
It is a choice.
Oh, well, thank you so much. We're going to have you back again tomorrow to unpack this message of becoming curious. Now, that's on the Friday show, I should say. To connect with Pastor Casey, go to CaseyTygrett.com. And if you get mixed up like I just did, just go to harvest-tv.com for a link to his project. It's called Becoming Curious. Still to come, Brian Bush with your prayer request from Israel. But up next, Pastor Mark Lance with today's teaching.